Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be picking up where we left off with our ADC scenario, that's Air Defense Command, and kind of working on both adding more units, kind of filling in the rest of the scenario here, as well as taking a look at some ways we can use Lua in order to save a little bit of time. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so last time we did this, we basically went through and discovered where all these air bases were. At each one of these air bases, of course, we went ahead and loaded them all up so we'd have a good number of different aircraft at each location. One thing that I actually found kind of interesting, and I ended up reporting this as a bug, is the F-86D is an all-weather, all-day and time and nighttime aircraft, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, it just doesn't want much to behave. So just to answer a question a couple people had last week. So the first things first, we need to now fill in the rest of the United States defense here. So let's think about that for a second. Again, the year is 1955. We put in all the Air Defense Command aircraft that literally exist. If you want to see something really terrifying here, if you press the O key, you can actually see just how many aircraft we have. Of course, when you're sitting there, you're going, that's not that much of a list. Press F11. I have 600 F-86s, 240 F-94s, 264 89Ds. It's a lot of aircraft. So now that that's been done, let's start thinking about the surface-to-air missile systems. Now, the United States at the time used basically two different types of surface-to-air missile systems. They had the Bomark system, which was basically a cruise missile that also blew up when it got to its destination. And we also had the Nike Ajax, which was actually a pretty slick little platform. Let me get you a picture. Go to the facilities, we'll type in Ajax, boop, boop, boop. There's actually a bunch of different versions of Nike. But the Ajax version was the Army's basically premier surface-to-air missile. I kind of think of this as the SA-2 American version kind of a thing. So it's actually kind of fun. So the Army controlled the the Nike Ajaxes, and the Bomark was controlled by the Air Force. Now, the neat thing about Bomark, like I was saying, is this thing is basically a cruise missile with a nuclear weapon on the top of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring in those different sites, but I'm going to do things a little bit differently here. Now, the silly thing for me to do, of course, we would go ahead and put a bunch of missiles all along here, or to use my imports function to go ahead and grab a bunch of these different missile silos. The problem with that is when I go to select objects for missions, I'm going to end up with a lot of junk on that menu. So what I'm going to do instead is bring them into their own side. All right, so to do that, we're going to go up to Editor, add Edit Size, and I'm going to go ahead and be a little more specific here. I'm going to call this U.S. Army. We'll use these guys for the Ajax sites. So I'm actually going to rename these guys real quick. I'm going to call this U.S. Air Force, USAF. There we go. So now we'll go ahead and make it so the postures between the Army and the Air Force are hostile. No, depends on who's asking. So we'll go ahead and set this up so that they're both friendly. I'm going to select U.S. Army. I'm going to go up to Editor. I'm going to click on Import Export Units. And I'm going to go ahead and import these units directly. Now, this is, like I said, a little bit of an interesting way to do it, but it takes the control away from the players, which in a lot of times is something you actually want to do. So let's go ahead and grab those Ajax sites. And now all the Nike Ajaxes are now maintained separate from our radar sites and our individual batteries and stuff like that. Now, like I said, the huge advantage to this is the fact they're not going to clutter up our screen when we go to pick missions on the other side. One thing we do want to do, though, is we want to go over to the Doctrine Control page and enable nuclear weapons. You know, I know that's wonderfully safe, but deal. We also want to make sure that our rules here make sense. Now, the reality is it's going to be the Air Force's job to identify things. It's going to be the Army's job to knock them out of the sky. So as a result, if we make this only hostile targets, we have to hope we can identify anything coming in so that they can engage it successfully. This is a very realistic scenario. You know, players, of course, will come in here and set it to free fire, but we're going to make it a little bit more difficult for ourselves and leave this as tight. Other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and engage optimistic targets. That's pretty useful. Opportunity targets, absolutely. If you get a free chance, go for it. One thing we do want to think about, though, kind of scrolling through all these, obviously we don't have any worry about any of this stuff down here, is we want to think about our MCON settings. Now, this is one of those things that you have to watch out for. If I go ahead and make this active MCON, that means all 128 Nike batteries is going to engage 5 separate radar systems at the same time. Now, I can't do math quickly, but that sounds like a little bit north of 600 radar calculations for something that doesn't need that level of fidelity. Remember, each one of our air bases has its own air traffic control radar on it, so we'll always be able to keep an eye on things. So I'd feel like that step might be a little bit redundant, but you could come in here and turn it on to active if you really, really want to slow the scenario down. WRA, of course, you want to come in here and decide how many missiles you want to launch per target. Remember, with Nike, it was kind of tricky because you can only track a missile at a time, and obviously we don't have to worry about any of this withdrawal stuff. So I'm pretty happy with the U.S. Army right now. They're going to go ahead and immediately start getting ready. Anything we identify as hostile, they'll automatically attack. So now we're going to look at the bow mark sites. Now the bow mark sites were controlled by the United States Air Force, which means, let me go save my scenario in case something bad happens here, which means we can import them directly into it and give player control over it. So I'm going to go ahead and load Army Air Force. We'll go back to United States. I think it's great somebody took the time to grab these. Bow mark, boop. And now we've got our bow mark sites. Now these bow mark sites are kind of weird because this older version of the bow mark, let me actually grab the weapon so you can take a look at it here. This is basically all there is to it. It's a cruise missile with a tremendously long range, and it has an active radar seeker on the nose, which is supposed to lock onto things. This, fortunately, is the conventionally armed bow mark. It is not the new one. The B model of the bow mark, let me go grab the nuclear warhead version, you can see is a little bit more deadly here. What we could do if we're real jerks is we could actually unpause here, grab one of the bow mark sites, go to weapons, and actually order that you use the nuclear one here. But you can see the nuclear ones are already selected. So as soon as these fire, it'll be nuclear weapons go. Speaking of nuclear weapons go, let's confirm the fact that we are allowed to use nuclear weapons. Now something the player might do is they might run in here and change it so that anybody could attack. You may wish able to disable this so the player does not have that choice. Speaking of taking away player choice, one thing you want to think about too is we don't want to play as the U.S. Army. This is a computer-only side. Let's go ahead and save this real fast. And now we're looking like we are getting somewhere. This is awesome. So one interesting thing too, and you're probably wondering a little bit about this, is the fact that I've got myself my pine tree line, which is a bunch of radars to keep an eye on things coming out of the north. I actually deleted the dew line because when I was doing a little bit of testing with this earlier, I found that the dew line gave you a nice 7-hour warning that you're about to get bombed. That doesn't do much for you because none of the airplanes in the U.S. have the range to rebase, so it really didn't matter from a gameplay perspective if you had that much extra warning. Leaving these radars in on the flip side gave you about a 2 hours warning, which was a pretty good amount of warning, especially if the incoming bombers went up the coast and hit in the mountains and everything like that. So I actually really prefer keeping it here like this. So now we need to think a little bit about the civilian targets. So our civilian targets, of course, are going to be cities. And I hate nuclear weapons. I think they're the worst thing ever. I'm sure we're going to invent something worse than nuclear weapons in a couple of years. We're going to have portable antimatter hand grenades that can destroy continents. I'm sure that's going to be my next least favorite thing. But for this scenario, let's keep it authentic. So I'm going to go ahead and import all the cities in the United States. And again, this is something that's like, oh my, that's a bit of a can of worms. Remember, this is a simulation. We could be any country here. So before I do that, I don't want to import the cities into the United States Air Force's side. If you do that, you're going to be adding about 600 more units to something that already has 1,100 units. So instead, I'm going to go back up to Add Edit Sides. Go ahead and press Add again. And we're going to type in Civil. Press OK. Make sure that everybody's a friend. So the United States Air Force, I consider these to be friends. U.S. Army, I consider them to be friends. Again, this isn't the 60s. We don't have to worry about peace protests just yet. We'll go to a 19 Army. That looks good, looks good. Grab these folks. So we'll make sure they're friendly to civil. And the United States Air Force, we're going to make them friendly. One thing I am going to do is I'm going to set the civil to be blind. There's no reason to calculate visibility from the civil side. It just doesn't matter. If you've already seen the bomber, you've already gotten blown up. And again, the USAF and the US Army should be doing all the work here anyway. Interesting thing you think about too is adjusting proficiency. Now, the United States Air Force in 1955 is not the United States Air Force that will be in the middle of the Vietnam War or the Air Force that was at the end of World War II. It had some ex-Korean pilots, but in general, your proficiency at a regular level assumes that you're well-trained plus you've seen experience. So you have to actually think about this a little bit. I don't think there'd be any veterans. I really don't think there'd be many aces left from World War II at this point. But again, that could be something you want to consider as a scenario designer. Let's go ahead and save everything. Now we have my civilian side, switch to civil. Let's go ahead and import those cities. All right. Import, export, load units from the sub file. Let's scroll down to, I think I put it under US. I went and created myself a little tiny import here that has all the different cities, and they've all been pre-configured to work in the Cold War. Click this little checkbox, press the load selected installations. Now look at how many cities I generated. Now, the first thing you want to do is you want to find cities like over here and get rid of them. And you're probably saying, hey, what about Puerto Rico? Why'd you do that? Well, the problem is all of our bombers are going to be attacking out of this direction, which means to travel from there to there is going to get you 3,800 nautical miles. We just don't have anything that has a range like that. Anchorage, of course, is a very, very tempting target as well. And of course, we have Hawaii, or Honolulu, I should say. And this would also be a very, very tempting target because it's basically a straight shot to get to it. Boy, would they get a bit of a surprise here. I'm actually going to remove Honolulu because it was not a U.S. state at the time. And Alaska, I don't remember what year we incorporated Alaska, so I'm not 100% sure I necessarily want that one either. So this is going to simplify my targeting challenging here. All right, looks good. So at this point now, we have three different sides. We have the Army, which is responsible for the Ajax. We have the Air Force, which is, obviously this is going to be us. We're also going to go into here and we're going to send that they are computer only, so the player does not have a choice of that. I'll go ahead and save that, and now we're looking really, really good as a scenario. Now we need to start thinking about the other guys, which is going to be our invaders. So let's take a look at a couple different ways we can approach this. So if you guys remember from way in the beginning, let's go ahead and grab myself a new team. I'll go add edit side. Since this will be a simulation, I'll type in red 4, which is just not the good guys. Set their postures. I'm going to assume they're not going to be friendly with anybody. United States Air Force, hostile. United States Army, hostile. We'll switch over to civil. We're just going to assume that they're hostile. Again, in the real world, you don't get such a pleasant, black and white as far as morality goes here. We're going to assume red forest hostile. We're going to go to the U.S. Army. We're going to assume the red forest is also hostile. Civil is friendly. U.S. Air Force is friendly. Delightful. Double click. Okay, so what are we going to do with these guys? So there's a right answer and a wrong answer for this. I shouldn't say there's a wrong answer. This is a less right answer. Let's be more specific. And what we could do is we could come up here and we could put all the Russian bases that existed that we knew about during the Cold War into here. We could load them up individually with individual squadrons and everything like that. Doing so, of course, would probably consume 8 to 10 hours of time that really doesn't do anything for a scenario. The other option, of course, we could do is we could come in here and remember, we're afraid of the 1,000 bomber raid. In reality, it would probably be closer to about 300 bombers, so it wouldn't be that bad. The other thing we could do, of course, is we could come in here and we could start inserting individual aircraft. I'll just show you how awful this would be. So I'd sit in here. Let's go ahead and get myself Badger A, which is kind of the original. Slap in an RN-42, which is a pretty good size. I believe that's one of the little ones, if I remember. Yeah, 200 kilotons, which is that's about 10 Hiroshimas right there. And we can just have it kind of chilling. And we'd sit here and we click on the bomber. Let's go ahead and unpause for a sec. Boop. And now we've got plenty of targets to select from. Now let me just go fix my timing real quick. I always make that mistake. Nice. So now we could click on that bomber and we could press the F1 key and we could pick, obviously we're not hitting Orlando, Florida from there. We'll pick, let's Winston-Salem there. And then of course we could unpause and that bomber would start floating towards the target. Now, you're probably sitting there going, whoa, slow down a second. You said 600 bombers. That's going to be a lot of work. So then people are like, well, I got this. So what they would do is they do something like this. They come in here and press Control F11, and they say bomba. So they come in here and say, I really want a land strike. They press the OK button. They'd pick all the targets in the United States, the ones they didn't want, and they'd add themselves 600 individual bombers. Now, this strategy is totally viable. However, and anybody who's played with command long enough knows what happens, is the fact that all the bombers will then approach the first target, blow it up, then approach the next target, blow it up, then approach the next target, blow it up. The problem is when you do this with 600 individual bombers, it tends to waste an awful lot of jet fuel and gives us plenty of opportunities to shoot them down. Not to mention, in case you haven't noticed, I'm at the maximum limits of my range here. So basically, this would be an exercise in a wasted time, or I should say, it wouldn't give you the most effective creation. So we're kind of at an impasse here, and you're sitting there going, no, he's going to set us up with something smart here. Well, I'm not a smart person. I'm just really lazy. So let's go ahead and get ourselves some Lua. Boop, boop, boop. Going to go to Lua Script Console. Looks pretty good to me. And let's go to town on this. So, two problems we have to solve. The first one is we need to create an awful lot of bombers. The second thing is we need to give them something to do. So let's go ahead and start with the easy one, create some bombers. Now, I don't have exact numbers on what the Soviet Union had at that time. I know it wasn't as many as we thought there were, so I'm just going to settle with 200. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create myself a handy-dandy for loop here. I'm going to say 4k equals 1 to 200 do. I'll type in the word n down there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the add unit command. So I'm going to do send edit, add units. Go get myself a little table here. I'll type in type equals air. And I'll actually got to be a little more careful with your things here. I'm typing type equals air. Let's see, we're going to say unit name equals, I don't know, TU16. We'll add a number to it just because I'm a nice guy. Again, K is simply that K value. We'll say loadout ID. I made a note of this a little while ago. It's 7381. Our database ID is going to be 629er. Our side is going to be red 4. I know some of you are sitting there going, can't you do it like this and do one space for each? I'm just old-fashioned. I came from the days of C, which, makes me not a good programmer, but oh well, what do you got to do about it? Let's see here. We need to give it a position. Latitude equals, I don't know, it's got to be 66.25. Our longitude is going to equal, I think it's minus 170 is what I settled on. And our altitude, of course, since it's in meters, is going to be 10,972, 72.8. And this will go ahead and generate for us 200 Tupolev 16s. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly go through and type this out for the B-29s, or I should say the Tupolev 4s as well. All right, that looks pretty good. So now we have ourselves our generator that will produce a bunch of Tupolev 16s, and I'm talking a lot of Tupolev 16s, 200. And we're also going to be producing ourselves 400 Tupolev 4s, which are going to be they're technically 4As, if I wanted to be a little more specific. And they're going to be generating them basically over here and over here. Now, it's great that we have this huge conglomeration of different aircraft. I'm actually going to save my mission before I demonstrate how nasty this is going to be when I press this button. Let's go ahead and test it and see if it works. Boop. All right, so you're probably sitting there going, hey, you only made yourself 2 airplanes. Try again. Watch. Oh my gosh. I basically have a supercomputer and woo! We just made 600 airplanes. As a matter of fact, if you don't believe me, you can actually come in here and see that I just made 600 airplanes in, what was that, a few seconds? I'm going to go ahead and delete them because we don't need them right now. So that's a quick and easy way to make a lot of airplanes. I love that technique. So now what we have to do is give the airplanes something to do. So let's see here. So first things first, we could probably assign each aircraft 1 target. If we wanted to do that, we'd probably say something like local targets equals VP, which is the command, get side. Actually, we want to get contacts at this particular point. Actually, no, I was right. We could say something like get side, and then we could say something along the lines of name equals, obviously we want the contacts from Red 4, which is Red 4's contacts.contacts. And what this would do for us is this would get a list of every single person on the entire map. This is awesome, because then basically I could loop through every single one of these aircraft and go ahead and assign 1 target per different aircraft. That's an absolutely solid way to do that. The only problem with that is you're going to run into some of these contacts are out of the way. The other thing, too, is I love the concept of not being consistent. By the way, if you're looking for the code for something like that, my next step would be to do something like number targets equals hashtag targets. Then I simply come in here and type in 4K, V and I pairs. And I say targets. Actually, what we wanted to do is collect all the units on the other side first. Excuse me. So we'd say local red units equals VP get side. Boop, boop. We'd say name equals red 4 dot units. There we go. So then we'd say red units. So what this code would do is it would say, get me each and every one of the bombers. So then all we have to do here, it would be something like this, to do end, and we simply come in here and do something like send, whoop, I can put myself set there, send, edit, attack, contact, and then we'd say something very simple. We do VGOID, which is the attacker, and then for our target, we'd simply say targets of K.GOID. Our attack mode, of course, would be mode, it would be an automatic attack, so we do mode 0. Let me just check my math here. Yeah, it's good. So yeah, there you go. This would be the code to go ahead and issue each and every one of our bombers 1 target in a list of targets that we have. Now, the good thing is we have less bombers than we have targets. So as a result, this will actually work pretty well. I'm definitely going to control A, control C in case this blows up on me. But we might as well test to see if it works, right? Boop. Uh-oh, I missed something in line 14. I have only done this 1 million times, so you can imagine how many times I've missed this. So that looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. All right, where's my boo-boo here? I always make that one teeny tiny little thing here. Targets of K, which would be the position inside of the array. That would be correct. Let's see, attempt to index a nil field. I see my mistake. So my mistake here was realizing that there's actually more targets than there are bombers. That's definitely something that I would do about 100 times. So unfortunately, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tweak the number of bombers here. I'm going to drop this down to 150 Tupolev 16s, which is going to help me just a little bit here. And I'm going to go ahead and take this group. And remember, I only have about 500 targets. That was definitely a newbie mistake on my part. But it's something I've done before. I forgot that I deleted a whole set of radar sites, and unfortunately that brought the unit count down a little bit. So 500 minus 150 is going to be 350. Let's see if we got it this time. Ha-ha! So now what I have done is I've issued attack commands for every single one of the aircraft that I just created. You're going to have to put up with my little lag spike here as I kind of click directly on this just to demonstrate how well this works. Now, if you want to hurt your eyeballs, look at that. Uh-oh, it's freaking out a little bit. There we go. So now, of course, if we sat here and unpause the scenario, each and every one of these 500 individual bombers will now go rushing down and attacking their targets. But we're going to run into an interesting little problem in a second. So I'm actually going to go ahead and unpause our scenario. I'm just going to let it run for a moment. Whoosh, look at all the bombers. Isn't that amazing? Can you imagine how long that would have taken us to sit there and crank out the old-fashioned way? So one thing you're probably noticing is the fact that I had this weird group of bombers that are absolutely refusing to do their job. Now, the reason this is going on is because there's a lot of different factors that impact whether or not a target can be attacked. There are things related to visibility. There are things related to range. Do I have the appropriate weapons? Am I allowed to use the appropriate weapons? As a result, you're always going to end up with this weird little group of bombers that just kind of, kind of zinging around in a little pop. I call it the circle, basically. So usually what I do with that group of bombers is I repause the scenario, and I pick something that I know is in range, and I kind of abuse it just a teeny tiny bit. There we go. Now that group of bombers has something to do. Let's run over to our tuple of 16s here and go grab this group real quickly. This is my other circly bombers. Go ahead and find them a good little group of targets that they're in range. That looks pretty good to me. And now, of course, if we unpause our scenario, let's go ahead and speed up time a teeny tiny bit here. You can see that all the bombers now will happily start choo-chooing towards their target to deliver their nuclear mayhem. Look at that. So we basically did something that would have taken by hand probably 4 or 5 hours and did it in about, 6 minutes, which isn't too bad if you ask me. So now all these bombers are each going to individually attack a single one of these visual targets. Now, the nice thing here is you're probably sitting here going, well, that's actually pretty cool because now it's going to be a nice dynamic scenario. It's going to be very unpredictable. Is it going to be unpredictable? And the answer is actually no. Let me show you why. So I'm going to go switch to the other side real quick. Let me go ahead and pause real fast. Let me go grab my USAF, and let me go ahead and put God mode on here. Now, if I take one of these bombers, let's say I pick this one right here. Again, they're awfully far away, so it's going to be very difficult for you to see this clearly. But again, I'm going to do the best I can here. And I were to draw a line from the position of that bomber straight in this direction, it makes it very easy to actually identify the targets that a particular bomber is going to be engaging. Obviously, we don't know exactly which one of these it's going to go for, but we have a pretty confident idea that it's probably going to go for one of those. In the real world, of course, these bombers would do a ziggy-zag kind of a thing like this to try to make it a little bit more difficult for us to go ahead and identify what particular target it's going to attack. But for the purposes of simplicity, that was really the easy way to go. The other option we could have done, too, is let me go ahead and grab the other side real quick. Red Force, boop, is we could have actually had them randomly select the targets. Now, randomly selecting a target is a little bit more complicated. So let me go ahead and grab my script console here. This is the code, by the way. I don't know how well you can see that. Again, I've got a pretty high resolution screen here, so this might be tricky. So what I can actually do is have them randomly attack a target as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave all this stuff in here, and I'm just kind of pop that code down here in the bottom and explain what that looks like. So the first thing we would do is we'd set up just the way we did it before. We'll do KV in I pairs, red units, do. I always like to type in the end at the end just to make my life a little bit simpler. So what we'd have to do is we'd have to get ourselves a random number. But of course, if you're going to do anything involving random numbers, you always want to randomly generate the seed here. So this is the code that I always use for it. It's what I was taught to do. It's called Randomized Timer back in Quick Basic when I was working back in the 80s and 90s. It's it still works here. So what I would do is I generate a random number. So I'd say math.random. And obviously my random number would be between 0 and how many units targets I can go ahead and attack. So I'll type in number of targets, just like that. Next, what I would do is I'd set a range variable. Now, you're probably wondering what that has to do with anything. Well, the reason I would create that is I can't attack a target that's out of range. So what I would do is I'd check to make sure the target I selected is in range before actually ordering up the attack. See? Clever. So next, what I would do is I'd go ahead and get myself the actual target itself. I'd say target equals targets of Rn. See how I've picked a random target here? This is a super duper easy way to pick a random target. Afterwards, I'm going to set my max range to 0. Now, you're probably wondering why. The problem is I have two different types of bombers here. If I was working with a single type of bomber, this would be a lot simpler. But since I made it complicated for myself, I need to consider both ranges. So what I would do is I'd start by getting which is the max range of a particular unit. So I'll say, let's see here, if I'll go ahead and grab all the code that I'm going to need. That was just one of those things that takes a minute to type out, so I quickly typed it out. If get unit, the red force, the current unit that I'm working on, equals database ID 629er, that simply means I'm working with a tuple of 16, all I have to do is say max range equals 2200. Then I'd say else max range, logically, would be the range of our tuple of 4a, and then just say end. So now all I have to do is go ahead and create a loop that continually loops to see whether or not the target I picked randomly is in range. So the way I do that is I come in here and type in, let's see here, while range is bigger than max range, then I'd say do, which, I don't know, it feels weird to me. If it's within, I'd say, give me a random number again. We did that earlier. Math.random, number targets. Then I would say, let's see, target equals targets of my random number. And then I'd simply say range equals tool range. This is the best thing ever. v.guid, which would be my bomber. And I'd compare it with the target GUID. So what that will do is give me the range in nautical miles between me and the target. So logically, if the range of the target is going to be less than the max range, we're good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and type an end there. Then all we have to do is order up my attack. I'll grab that one I had a minute ago. Boop. And now I am good to go. So what this will do is instead of selecting targets off the list, it'll simply randomly select the target. Now you're still going to run into the circlies here because you're always going to pick a target that you can't attack just for whatever reason. It could even be something to do with the actual game engine itself that is a limit on the number of attacks. But again, this works fairly well. So now we have our little send out attack targets, and this code gives me the random. By the way, if you're going to use the random version, make sure you're not accidentally picking the regular version. Although what I see a lot of people do, and this is super clever, is they'll actually set it up so that the random version fires after the main version, just to give yourself a little bit of redundancy in the trying to eliminate the circlies is what I like to call them. The other thing we can do too is move these targets closer so that you're less likely to accidentally pick a target that is just a little out of range. By the way, if you do create air bases for these units, you'll never be able to execute this mission because they'll always have to return to base. To work at that problem, by the way, is actually pretty simple too. Go ahead and close that out. Press Control-Shift-F9 again. To fix that, oh, by the way, don't forget to set your Red Force to be able to use nuclear weapons. If they can't use nuclear weapons, this scenario is going to be a lot shorter. What you can actually do is come in here and basically eliminate all the bingo logic. So it can say, units do not return to base when they run out of fuel. Obviously, that's super dangerous, but that would be a way to kind of get around that problem if you did create some sort of airbase or something like that. So now that everybody's been given permission to use our nuclear weapons, the nuclear weapons are now armed and ready to rock. We've given them a perfect permission to go ahead and use those nuclear weapons. I'm also going to say they can shoot at anybody they want. Don't turn on opportunity targets, by the way. If you choose to do that, you're going to find your scenario much shorter. One thing I do like to do is shut off automatic evasion. This is the 50s. You don't need to evade a missile. It's just not something you need to worry about yet. So now all we have to do is fix the time of day. You can see that my time is fast forwarded by 13 minutes here. So let's go ahead and do 9:30, no, Copy. Okay. And now I'm going to press save one more time. So now we have a massive bomber attack, all attacking different things throughout the United States. We've eliminated the circly units. Now you're going, well, just a minute ago, you were showing us that stuff with that random. Why don't you use that? Well, the reality is I'm going to leave this for the pros. This is something we can use here if we want to make it so every time you run the scenario, you get a different target. The way we do that is we go up to Editor, Event Editor, we go to Events, create a new event, and we call this one Scenario Started. Stargated. Remember, scenario stargated. So we come in here and we'd add a pretty basic trigger. Well, let's see, scenario has started. Boop. Go ahead and create that one. You don't even have to do anything special with that. You just have to make sure scenario is loaded. Then I come in here. I go ahead and add that one in here. Scenario is loaded. The next condition I always like to do, scenario has started. Yes. Press OK, go ahead and close that one. I can come in here and say yes. So the scenario is loaded and the scenario has started. Then we come down here and we create that Lua script just like that. So I do Lua script, create new action. Bombers a go-go. So then I just come in here, grab that beautiful code that I created a minute ago, boop, and paste it right in here. And you can see now I've got myself, when I start the scenario, it will randomly send my bombers out every single time, which is actually pretty cool because if you've already put the bombers and everything completely into place, we're basically ready to go. And again, that's basically going to be the easy version of this scenario. So I'm going to go ahead and close all that out. I'm actually going to go ahead and delete that. I don't need that. But again, you can see just how easy that would be. And I've got some tutorials from way back in the day that does this. So this is getting on about half an hour ago. So it's probably a good idea to just go ahead and pause this one. Next time, we'll take a scenario and actually give it for a test run. And we'll look for ways to go ahead and kind of clean up some of the, what's the best way to describe it? Scenario weirdness that you're probably going to encounter every time you start out to send a scenario like this. Enjoy.